Okay, hello. My name is Bertie Vidgen. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Rewire. We're a tech startup which helps platforms, companies, brands, content creators to create amazing online communities. So we both try to promote positive and engaging content whilst also taking action against bad content. And one of the things that we're really passionate about is how can we stop online hate speech? Now, increasingly, that means using some form of AI in the mix. So there's some good reasons for that. I mean, I know AI sometimes sounds like a dirty word, but it's scalable, it's fast, it's very cost-effective, and I think really importantly, it helps us to reduce the burden on human moderators who would otherwise have to do that work. But there are some problems, and I think before we ever use an AI system, we have to ask ourselves, well, how good is it? Truly, how well is it performing? And this is a question I've thought a lot about over 7 years of research at the University of Oxford, the Alan Turing Institute, and now at Rewire. A lot of that with Rewire's CTO, Paul Rotger. And I think the thing that we've really realized is that the way we're answering this question might be the problem. We're not really answering it in the right way. And let me give a few examples. So if you look at the academic papers, and there's tons of debate always around what metrics should we use, what data sets should we use to evaluate models, but when they introduce a new model, a new technique for detecting hate, they'll often say, look, we've hit 80–90% performance, whether that's accuracy, AUC, F1, any metric you can think of. You look at Facebook, they're now saying 97% plus of all the hate they take down is proactively detected, and they've said that for a while. And every startup that I've come across has some kind of nice scatter plot showing their amazing stratospheric performance compared to all of their competitors. So if you look at those data points, it sounds like we've kind of solved the problem of detecting online hate. But then if you talk to people on the ground, if you talk to content moderators, NGO workers, people who are actually dealing with this every day, they will tell you that the tools they have are maybe 50% accurate at best. That's a huge discrepancy. So why do we have that problem? What can we do about it? I think I'd like to say something pretty radical for a tech startup. Maybe we should take a step back, not think about technology, think about what we're really trying to assess. What would we do if we had a human and we were trying to assess their work? After all, we are asking the AI to make human-level or human-like assessments. So actually, we have a good example of that. At Rewire, we have a team of annotators, moderators, data labelers. When we assess them, we might start off with a headline statistic, okay, 80% right. Straight away, we ask ourselves, okay, what is in that 80%? Do I trust the labels? How hard is the data? Are you just getting all the easy stuff right? Or are you actually getting the hard stuff right as well? We then go 2, 3, 4 levels deeper. So maybe you're good at X, you're okay at Y, and you absolutely suck at Z, and we need to do something to help you. This is useful insight, something we can use. We never do this for AI. We always just stick at the high-level statistic. We don't go any deeper. And actually, we can easily change that. So in this piece of research, we kind of stole an idea from software development, software engineering, called functional testing. Now, I don't have time to go into fully how that works, but very briefly, the idea is that you specify model traits that you want. So for hate speech detection, that could be, I want the model to pick up on offensive and prejudicial use of slurs. But I don't want the model to think that counter-speech and reclaimed use of slurs is hateful. So you can specify things that the model shouldn't do as well as things that it should. You build those out, you develop ways of testing each of those functionalities, and then you can use that to assess the model in a much more granular, diagnostic way. This is what we did. The project kind of ballooned in size, so we went from just doing English to then doing 10 other languages, including Arabic, Simple Chinese, Polish, Dutch. We ended up with over 25 functionalities across all those languages. We also had 7 different targets of hate that we were able to assess using these models. Now, it's still not complete. It's still a partial piece of work, but it keeps expanding. We just added in emoji-based forms of hate that we can assess for. And I think the key thing that we learned from this is that models have some really shocking weaknesses. We tested every model that we could from industry. Not all of the models were available, sadly, but all the ones that we could. And we found that they really struggle with some targets and types of hate. They really struggle with implicit forms of hate. They're very inconsistent across different languages. They make really silly mistakes. So you might have someone saying, I hate black cats, I hate Chinese food. Models are picking that up as hate speech. And once we use these insights, we can then start to build models in better ways. I think I'm nearly at the end, so I'll just say this is the website we built, HateCheck.ai. Please go there, check it out. Everything's fully open source, fully documented. We really encourage people to use it, to build on it. We know we definitely haven't got everything right, so if you have critical feedback, if you hate what we've done, we'd also love to hear that as well. And then very final shout out before I get shuffled off stage. We also have an API that we make available, the Rewire API. It does automatic content classifications for toxic and unwanted content. We have a program for academics. And so if you want to use it, you're more than welcome to. Just send me a message and we'll give you free access, and then you can use that for your research. Thank you.
Okay. We are now going to do a Q&A, so I'm going to ask all of our speakers to kind of come on up here and stand around awkwardly. And I think Elena is out there with a mic. Do we?
We have 2 mics.
We have 2 mics. We have 2 mics. And we have a question right here. Yeah, if some of you guys can sit, please, we're just going to do the best we can.
Oh, right. Okay. So, hi, I have 2 questions for Rebecca, although one is potentially a suggestion in the form of a question. But the first is the notion of writing passwords down in a notebook. Was your research treating that as a bad thing? Because often air gapping, you're a senior citizen couple or you're an unsophisticated user, you don't have people in the house. It's a very simple form of protecting information as long as it doesn't say, passwords on it. And then the second item was this notion of having like a discoverability mode or a kids mode for security tools. I think that's an area where there's a lot of room for research. The security industry as a whole has never really developed tools that people like our parents could easily use. So. Thank you.
I will tackle the first question first. I agree with you that in theory, writing down your passwords in a notebook, especially if it's in a secured location and there's no one else that has access to it, is great. I think the difficulty is that often that kind of encourages the recycling of passwords. And so, as in the anecdote with my mom, she essentially will just use the same password, and then when it needs to be capitalize one letter or like add a hash and an exclamation point. So I think there's a little bit of conflation maybe that when people are writing down their passwords, it often reflects the fact that like you might need 100+ passwords, and if you're able to write all of those down, then it's likely that you're also using probably what we would call bad password hygiene. I will say from my own personal experience, using a digital password manager has made it much easier to have unique passwords for each of my sites. So I think that maybe answers the question a little bit, but fair enough that if your paper is secure, then it's not the worst practice. And then in terms of other features, I mean, we've done research with other studies as well where parents have really talked about their concerns with children because there's sort of this assumption now that you use your device as a babysitter to some degree. And I'm not a parent and I can't really fault anyone for doing that, but I think the challenge is that many of our applications or games are not, because there's concerns sort of around knowing that someone is a child, we're not necessarily tailoring products to children unless they're very specifically for children, like YouTube Kids. Did you want to clarify your question?
Kids mode is equivalent to seniors mode.
Oh. So making a slightly simpler interface entirely if someone indicates that they're a senior and they want that. Yeah, that's actually a great idea that I haven't heard a lot. And I feel like right now there's a lot of reliance essentially on parents educating themselves or relying on their children or younger relatives to do so. And I kind of love that idea of having something that's a lot sort of simpler and simplistic and focuses on the apps and features that parents really need, or older folks in this case really need. So it's a great design consideration.
Okay, how about here?
This question's for Joseph at Stanford. I really like the idea of the chill bot that you had. It was great. My question is, how much of that intervention led to people self-moderating or self-deleting the content? Like, what percentage of people who, when Chillbot was deployed, took down their own post?
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but a significant amount. The ideal was for the tool to be used before an infraction had been committed, when things were still not quite over the line. In practice, that didn't always happen. It was frequently used retroactively when things had been like not quite over the line in the past, but the moderator wanted to give a notice so that the person wouldn't escalate in the future. But an interesting pattern that did happen was that being aware that the tool was being used did actually change users' patterns of behavior in the long term. So a lot of the things that were addressed just overall became less common in the future. Does that answer your question?
We've got a question far over there, and then we'll come up.
Hi, Michael Cito. This is a question for the first presenter. With the data on the paid members, did you have access to their data pre-paying? Because in my experience, people will try something for free, and if they like it enough, they'll pay to join it. And the reason I ask is, as a psychologist, I know about quite a lot of research where paying is kind of a commitment device. It kind of, you double down on what your intention was. And so I wonder, is it an entitlement effect where people who pay feel like they can treat others because I paid for this? Or is it more, I was already planning to be a jerk, and now I'm really going to invest in that because I've paid for it?
Right. So to quote my co-researcher, Chris McGuffey, they've created a little club of assholes by letting people think, well, I maybe got in trouble for this before. Because the platform does encourage you to live out your wildest dreams. And specific to this platform, sexual role play is totally fine if you were age verified. The issue is we see that behavior often begets other behaviors. No, we could not see when a user signed up to suddenly become a paid user. In this sample, you either were or were not a paid user. We did have the user sign-up date, though. Some of these users had been on the platform in excess of 15 years. They liked being there. And also, this purchase is not a one-time purchase, it's a monthly subscription. So you have the option to not continue your purchase, but you would only buy something if you think you're gonna get a better outcome by having the paid version. And in this case, it leads you to believe that you can maybe have more extreme conversations than the free version.
Great. Up here. And then this side of the room, start thinking, yeah, thank you.
Oh, thanks. Hi, Joseph. I know you just sat down, but I've got another question for you. So I was really heartened to hear the positive responses from community members to Chillbot. And I was just wondering if, or what kinds of communities you tested the bot in, and if or to what extent the norms of those communities might have impacted the responses, the positive responses to the bot.
Yeah, that's a great question. The communities, the most common type we tested with was social gaming type communities, because that's a lot of what is on Discord. We also had a couple of spaces that were programming focused. So I think one was a JavaScript learning type community. And I think definitely the norms impacted the reception of the tool. I think one of the interesting long-term patterns, though, is often users exist in a space thinking that moderators only exist when something goes wrong. And the idea that in fact they are watching the whole time, they're paying attention, and maybe kind of keeping an eye on you even when you haven't broken a rule does have a qualitative effect, at least on behavior, but we weren't quite able to measure that. I don't have great details. We had a limited number of communities, so I don't have statistics on the impact of community type, but I think it's definitely likely to have had an effect.
Right back there. Thanks, Elena.
Hi, Alexandra Kucherave from the Center for IT and IP Law at the University of Leuven in Belgium, and also a visiting researcher here. So I have a question for the last speaker about hate speech. Coming from Europe, we have different understanding of hate speech than in here, yet we really cannot agree on one definition. So how did you take that into account? do you have like this broader understanding? And did you take into account like what's just illegal? And did you look at the different legislations? Like, for example, like I originally come from Poland, so definitions of hate speech there in comparison to other European countries is also very different. So if you could elaborate on that, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really tricky question. Hate is incredibly complex, contentious, contextual. So I guess a few things. So one, we weren't just looking at illegal forms of hate, partly because every country you go to, different laws, different scopes of laws. You know, in the UK, for example, unfortunately and famously, misogyny is not a form of hate crime, so you have a lot of challenges there. We were actually, I mean, so one thing I probably should have said is that this testing suite is really trying to identify fatal flaws in your models. It's not looking at some of the edge case, very contextual, very subtle forms of hate. It is more focused on things like explicit hateful stuff, like I hate a particular group, or direct threats against that group. So if your model can't pick up on these forms of hate, you have a really serious problem. And that actually made it a lot easier to get consensus around what the forms of hate were, because we sort of slightly sidestepped some of those grey areas. We're actually thinking about that a lot now, how we can expand it to cover different types of hate and different targets, but it does get tricky. And as a point of process, we had language experts. So each country that we worked in, or each language that we worked in, we had a native speaker who has some experience in hate and social media to help make those nuanced judgments. But it's incredibly hard to be truly comparable across languages, across settings, because you do just start to get into various issues. So we kind of solved it. We didn't quite. I think it's like an 80% solution. Thank you.
I'm just going to use the moderator's prerogative for 1 second, and connect Bertie, you and Courtney on something. I helped set up GIF-CT when I was at Facebook, and one of the healthy criticisms, including from Courtney and many others in civil society, was the risk that GIF-CT would essentially create shared policy across platforms that would create a common standard for the internet. And I think what I wonder about, and Bertie, you might have a perspective on this, do shared models effectively do that? Even though we don't call them policies, we call them models. And Courtney, I invite you to answer that as well.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I think AI models like this are part of an enforcement process, right? They can't give you the answer, they can just help you to get there and to enforce the policies that you've decided on. I think it's pretty rare that people are just applying AI and then sort of saying, right, that's it, just let the AI make the decision, or at least that could be quite an irresponsible thing to do, so you need a human to check in as well. It's a real challenge. Everyone wants to have these kind of standardized global policies, and there's good reasons for that. It makes it easier to make cross-country comparisons, to track things over time, to understand what's happening, and to be very transparent with people. The reality is that hate speech and all forms of harm are just changing so quickly, and they're so different on every platform and in every context. Sometimes that sort of urge towards standardization just creates a whole load of problems, and it just means that you end up saying things which don't really ring true for any particular context. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's just a sort of a fatal conundrum. But I'll pass over.
Yeah, I think you could consider shared models as a form of governance at a certain level that is creating a shared norm, a shared structure. I think that one of the concerns about like cross-platform coordination and creating standard rules, governance for the internet in these different ways is that if you're not doing kind of the level of research and transparency reporting at the end of it to see what are the impacts of those models and how well do they work on, say, detecting hate speech or detecting terrorism, and was that actually terrorism, or was it reporting on terrorism, or was it, criticizing terrorism? That is, I think, where the greatest concern comes. But I think there's also been an evolution since the start of the GIF-CT, where there was a great concern. But I think that the evolution of all of these online harms, the fact that we are online, that is our life. It's not like digital safety over here and the rest of the world here. Like, they're combined. We have to come up with scalable solutions, and if you can't have 500 different regulations and try to comply with all those different regulations. So I think it's more interesting to look at non-governmental, multi-stakeholder ways of coming up with these kind of cross-platform solutions, but then needing to go back and do the research afterwards to see how well it did in detecting what was it actually, and retrain those models.
Yep, great.
Can I butt in
Sure.
to that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, we've become a panel, not a Q&A session.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead, Caroline.
I promise
Yeah.
I'll be quick. But yeah, like I think, what strikes me about the cross-platform, standardization as well, is that as soon as you identify a common boogeyman, for whatever reason, then that content just goes. And this is why, post-FOSTA SESTA, we're seeing a wide deplatforming of sex. And what are the labor repercussions of that? That a set of workers doesn't know where to go. So while it's very important to say, well, why is this terrorism video visible on YouTube but not on Facebook? At the same time, when we create that standardization, we need to remember that there are lives and livelihoods at stake, and that that type of behavior at the moment doesn't cater for the gray areas. So yeah, sorry, just being the killjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a question here. I don't know if that question's still there. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thanks. Jackie from Moonshot, and I had another question for Bertie from Rewire, and you sort of started answering this, I think, in your last response, but I was wondering if your work at Rewire takes into account any of the sort of external events or cultural shifts that impact hate speech and introduces new terms or changes the context around words that were previously not considered hate speech and become used in that hateful context.
Yeah, well, really challenging topic, so a bit of self-promotion. So I think 2 years ago when COVID first hit, we were one of the first, when I was still doing more research, one of the first research groups to look at xenophobia, which was really interesting because no one had really studied that online. And it suddenly became a massive issue, and it's like, well, we don't have any of the tools we need to study it. So that was a great case of where we were just totally unprepared for a very dramatic change that happened. I mean, it's I don't think I'm giving away any sort of Rewire commercial secrets to say that one of the things that we do, and I think lots of companies do this, is to have people going out and trying to test our models and trying to trick them and fool them in real time. So trained people that we trust saying, look, I'm just going to break this model. I'm going to see what I can find in the real world and work out what's going to cause it to make a mistake. That's such a powerful way of understanding where your model goes wrong, because you see something new online which your model's never seen before. Okay, it kind of sucks at it. You can very quickly, A, identify that problem, and then B, start to fix it. So we do try to take that into account as much as we can. Now, the risk is, of course, is that you overcorrect, and AI models have a problem of catastrophic forgetting. As you teach them new things, they can start to forget some of the old stuff they learned, and so it's always a balancing act as to how much you want to optimize for the new content. Sometimes also we do models which are just a short-term quick fix, like it's a week-long fix. It's not going to be used again, but it does solve a very short-term problem. When we look at unexpected events like terrorist attacks, and a big part of my PhD looks at that, very different discourse that you'll see for about 24 hours a week after, but then it does kind of die down and you sort of go back to a normal. Final thing is that at some point we start to brush up against the limits of AI models. I mean, AI models are incredibly powerful. We're completely obsessed with the role of data and making them even more powerful. But they're not perfect. AI models just cannot do everything. When you look at general artificial intelligence, we're like a long way off from doing anything like superhuman. So we have to take that into account as well. And with some forms of really complex content, you just need a human. You just need a human to make that judgment, and you can't rely on the AI. Thanks.
Yeah, right here. And then we'll go back there.
Hi, question for Carolina. I wanted to know if, especially based on the title, Guilty Until Proven Innocent, have you thought about some of the ideal attributes of a scalable appeals process for the platforms that, let's assume, are going to make inconsistent or incorrect moderation judgments?
So are you basically asking me about simplifying the appeals? Is that what you're saying?
Carolina, can you use the mic?
Ideal appeals experience for you as someone who may have been inaccurately taken off a platform?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, actually. I think, a really good appeal would be to, okay, you get your content deleted, and then you get to either speak to someone, which I know is difficult at scale, or to have some specific options about appealing that get it back up really quickly. So if you think about copyright, for instance, which is the other bane of my existence, because as a dancer, I dance to music. I don't dance to my voice doing tu-tu-tu-tu-tu, but this is what platforms want you to do unless you've got their copyright. What happens if you post a choreography with a song, and then the social media platform takes it down for copyright violation. But the good thing about that on Instagram is that more often than not, you get to click on an appeal, and then there's 3 buttons like fair use or, I own the copyright of this song. Like, there's a few options that make sure that your content gets re-uploaded straight away. And I think something like that could be very, very helpful, particularly for content that is already within community guidelines. You could just say, if you could say it's a mistake and then it gets put back up, or, provide more information, provide screenshots, which I'm aware is already available on platforms. But I think the issue of doing something like that in an automated fashion and at scale is that if one of your videos blow up, and then a variety of other videos blow up, and people start flagging you, then you have all of these active violations which lead to your content being deleted. And because you're waiting for a human to go and review that decision, your account might go before someone even has the chance to review the violations, and you might have like 20 active violations. So I think if there was a first step of having a very quick re-upload process for something that is clearly a mistake, that would already be really helpful. And then maybe for something a bit more contentious, something a bit more gray area, it would be good to have either, I'm obviously a sociologist more than a machine learning person, so I can't tell you how to correctly train machine learning for gray areas, but it seems that the human element there is missing. Like, when people are having their accounts deleted, sometimes they are receiving wrong appeal links, or sometimes you're taken to a page that glitches, or sometimes you're told, okay, you're gonna hear from us in 24 hours, and 3 months later you've heard from no one. So it just seems like the public and the users are not educated about the appeal process because platforms do not provide that information. And it also seems that the information they do provide and the processes that they do have are glitching and are not working. And I'm really seeing that in cases of hacking. Because of my experiences and the fact that I've been covered in the media and that I speak to platforms, I've become a volunteer mediator between Instagram in particular and deleted users. So I get tens to hundreds of weekly messages by people trying to get me to help them to re-upload their account. And particularly when it comes to hacking, the hacker changes the 2-factor, the hacker gets in and start posting hate speech or child sexual abuse material to get that person's account deleted. And then you have no way of recovering your account because particularly on Instagram, it says, okay, try and recover through this link. And then it seems that you have to appeal over and over again for that to work. And it just seems completely inaccessible. So I think a mix of a quicker, more automated way of recovering content that clearly doesn't violate guidelines with then people that you can actually speak to and processes that are clear and functioning would be really good. I hope that answers your question. There's a lot of issues in there.
All right, let's do one, I think, final question. I can definitely tell you as a former Facebook employee, I also am a mediator for lots of people that have been locked out of their accounts. I feel like I still should get a paycheck. All right, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Hi, question for Josh. Really loved the talk. It's fascinating to see the methodology you adopted for looking at this sort of removal of these permanent links or whatever. I think it raises a fantastic question around the role of permanence more generally on the internet, especially as we kind of enter this sort of 2nd or 3rd generation of internet users. Anthropologists and historians are going to start needing to understand what the archive of the internet looks like. And I wanted to ask kind of more generally, did you look into any sort of like permanence mechanisms? Did you look at archives of pages? Did you look at caching? And how did your learnings translate into your kind of methodology?
Yes, great question. I think on the first point of anthropologists and historians, one of my goals in this project was when the internet kind of first came about in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a big push by those sort of folks to look at the permanence of the internet, and then that intellectual tradition just kind of fell off. And a part of my research is I hope to rejuvenate that spirit. And so thank you for making that connection. On the second point of archival sources, I think they're exceptionally important. So just the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine is, I think one of the best things that has been created as a tool for the internet. Except the websites that we're trying to look at are often so sparse. It's one person who visited some misinformation link, and it just didn't get recorded by Internet Archive. And so I think that to make some of these impermanent websites more permanent to researchers is more kind of instantaneous recording, whether that be identifying domains that we have particular interest in, and just, often in an archive you set a level that you want to go to from a homepage, and then it goes to a link, and then maybe another link, but maybe we have to go 100 links deep to see really, because what's on a homepage and what is shared on social media are not the same thing. So that's one option, or another would be to use sort of the panel data that we have, and as soon as we see somebody visiting a site, like almost instantaneously recording it.
Awesome. Thank you to all the panelists. These are really wonderful talks. Thanks for sticking around for the Q&A. Thank you to everybody. Lunch